Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined as ever by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. And I have to say, Happy New Year. And what a way to start it off with that jumper. Absolutely banging, mate. Banging jumper.
Hey, it's only, 300 days until Christmas again? So perfectly entitled to still be wearing my festive jumper. Happy New Year to you and to everybody else as well.
Appreciate it. And obviously, silly season is kicking off again with rumours galore. Some deals very close as well. We're going to be going through the latest rumours, the latest questions from a lot of you over the last few days with Ben, get his take, his understanding on the current situations. Any questions, feel free to member chat them in or super chat them in, and we'll pose them to Ben, and he'll give us the honest answer as best he can. And I did want to start with Man United, because there's a lot going on there, Ben, with the new partial takeover from Sir Jim, talks of a meeting between the sort of new officials and the managers today, and a lot going on as well with the jadon Sancho exit back to Borussia Dortmund, and then talk today of Olise being maybe the first major permanent signing under Ineos. What's your latest understanding of the takeover, first of all, and when are we likely to see the Blancs and the Paul Mitchells, etc., in position running the football club?
Well, first of all, it's good we're heading into 2024 and the Sheikh Jassim trolls are dead. And we had a lot of misinformation. And of course, Sheikh Jassim was a contender for much of the process, but Jim Ratcliffe is in the completion process now. And there's two things here. One is the announcement is not the done deal. The completion process is the done deal. So that adds about 6 weeks, and those close to Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos are starting to do these meet and greets and fact finding and FaceTime and put a strategy in place, because you want to hit the ground running, and it's difficult mid-season when you don't have the off-season to kind of have that transition period. But they won't be in until February, which means that legally, if you like, or officially, they can't influence the January window. But the second point is, in the negotiations, there was something that is now listed and formally called a transfers plan. And in getting Sporting control, what Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have done is run by a transfers plan in conjunction with the current hierarchy and the Glazers. So if Manchester United deviate from that transfers plan in January, they must take all reasonable efforts to run decision-making by Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. If they execute that transfers plan, it's on them. And jadon Sancho, for example, would have been in that transfers plan as a possible outgoing. So not every single thing needs to be run by Sir Jim Ratcliffe, because he can input, but he cannot execute at this point. So the summer's going to have a bigger impact, and Manchester United obviously are bound by financial fair play. So they're going to need some outgoings in order to have some incomings. But we know that a striker is needed, a more experienced one. And I think as well, a right centre-back is going to be on the list as well. But the situation with Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe is that they've got Sporting control, and that Sporting control is not, despite reports, some kind of panel where Ineos outnumber the Glazers 2-1. It's just straight Sporting control that has been delegated by the board. So there were some suggestions that proved incorrect that implied that Joel Glazer would have to represent the majority shareholder, if you like. But it's not strictly true, because the Glazers are only the majority singular shareholder if they gang up on Ratcliffe. If you look at them individually, Ratcliffe has the most shares. And as I reported exclusively towards the end of the process, it's not just 25%. The 300 million that he's invested, which will be put into likely Old Trafford and Carrington renovations, is effectively equity injected into the club. So for that 300 million, $200 million up front, 100 million in 2024, a bit later down the line, Ratcliffe's getting about another 4% of common stock. So his overall standing in the football club is 29%. And the main aim is obviously to build a new hierarchy, modernize the football club, and that needs a strategic review first. So when people ask what's going to happen, it's not about signings first, it's not about Olise first, it's about strategy first, executive appointments first. Because how can you say who Manchester United may or may not want if you've not yet worked out if you're going for Paul Mitchell, Dan Ashworth, or both of them? It's a backwards strategic process. So Olise, as the excellent Nizar Kinsella says, is a name that Manchester United's current hierarchy and Ineos admire. And there is a release clause of just over 35 million that is there. It was really complicated, the old release clause that Chelsea tried to trigger. Olise may be looking for options in the summer, but I'd be just a little bit hesitant about pinning set targets to Manchester United for summer 2024, because the first thing is Ineos have to come in. The second thing is Ineos have to do a strategic review. The third thing is Ineos have to work out who is going to lead on a day-to-day on the football recruitment side, and then they can finalise a summer budget and a summer plan.
Which makes a lot of sense. I was talking to KJ earlier today, and I know a lot of United fans want them in and want 2 or 3 big signings almost instantly, but they're not going to be ratified and confirmed probably until near the end of January anyway. And the worst thing we could do now is drop 150 million pounds on players who then don't fit the overarching strategy that the new people running the football element of the club decide to do. You don't want to waste money in that regard, which I think is absolutely fair. It's interesting, as you point out as well, that Sajim is going to be the majority shareholder as an individual. We also know the Glazers haven't exactly been seeing eye to eye collectively over this process anyway. When you read a lot of the reports, some wanted to keep it, some wanted to sell. So yeah, it's going to be intriguing to see. And I think it's great that at the very least, sporting control is being handed over to somebody else, because I would say the biggest issue, barring dividends and the debt at the club, the biggest issue that we've had is non-footballing people running the football operation at this football club for far too long. One of the potential exits from the club, though, that seems to really have picked up pace in the last 24 hours is jadon Sancho's exit back to Dortmund. How likely is that, in your opinion, to be completed soon and go through?
It's certainly advancing, and Manchester United want this done early. It's a strange deal in many ways, but it's in keeping with something that I think we discussed the last time I was on towards the back end of the window. And that is that many suitors, even Dortmund, which is a return potentially, want to kind of try before they buy situation with Sancho. And Dortmund, more than most, are going to be well aware of what they perceive to be accurate reports about Sancho and conduct and training coming out of Carrington versus potentially more of a club spin. So they're very informed on the situation, but they still want a try before they buy. They want a loan situation, and that fee, especially if Manchester United shoulder any of the wages, doesn't really allow Manchester United to move in the market. So that to me suggests that this is an acceptance from Manchester United that for the players' sake, for the mood's sake, for the club's sake, for the new era's sake, they need to resolve this, as opposed to playing hard ball and sticking to what they've always wanted, which is £50 million for jadon Sancho. And at the back end of the last Saudi window, which was September, Al Ittifaq made a call and they asked about Sancho on loan. And the response they got was it must be with an obligation to buy for 50 million. And that was out of their budget. And Sancho didn't want Saudi anyway. But the price was there at that point, 50 million. Now, maybe it's dropped a little bit because of the situation. The player's not played. We're a window further along. But it shows you that even at that point, Manchester United were quoting a price to try and get rid of Sancho. Now, Dortmund are talking about a loan. And loan is a key word for them. It's the same with Ian Maatsen at Chelsea. They've inquired, but they want a loan. Maybe there's an option. Perhaps Manchester United will try for an obligation. But my understanding is it's more framed around the loan fee, and then there's a discussion around the wages. So I think there's a strong chance this will happen because Sancho wants the move, but it has to be right for Manchester United. And that's the paradox here. Maybe Manchester United feel what's right for them is just resolving it. But if we're only talking about finances and letting Manchester United move in this market, they need to be cashing in, because a loan doesn't help Manchester United raise the funds they need to counter that and go and sign someone else. So then that would suggest to me, if Sancho is just loaned, that there's even more emphasis on getting a big fee in for Anthony Martial now in the last seemingly opportunity to sell him. Otherwise, Manchester United are going to be really restricted in this window.
Yeah, no, I understand it completely. And I think it's the one thing about getting him back to Dortmund I like the sound of is Dortmund is a great marketing tool as well. If he goes there on loan, does well, finds his feet again, I suppose Man United will look at it from along the lines of there's an opportunity to recoup some of that money that we invested into him. Unfortunately for us, and I think part of it is on the player, of course. I think a big part of it is like every player that comes to Man United under the way we've operated the last 10 years, they regress. Trying to recoup some of that money is going to be important, as it's consistently published that we are flying so close to that FFP line. It's important to recoup some of that money. But I just want to see Sancho go somewhere and play and enjoy his football again. I think that there has been, and I've done it myself, genuine criticism of his performances since he's been here. But the way I see people treating him for just going out with friends at New Year's and having a party when he's not even playing. If he was meant to have a game the next day and he was out partying, I understand the frustration. But the guy's he's not training to play. The way he's being treated as though he is the reason that Man United are where we are, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I'd like to just see it moved on for him, moved on for the club, and you can kind of just wash your hands and start focusing on other areas. I just wish that Anthony was also leaving as well, if I'm being honest. But that's a different conversation, really. In terms of incomings this month to Man United, there's talks of loans. Timo Werner's name has come up as an example. Do you see Man United signing anybody, even on a short-term loan?
Yeah, I think they may have to proceed in that manner unless they can bring a fee in. And January, and it's worth pointing this out more broadly, it's a seller's market, not a buyer's market. And maybe Chelsea warped things a little bit within the last few windows because everyone now presumes that a club like Chelsea are going to spend. So if Manchester United are starting a new project, they're going to spend. Arsenal are making sure that they don't stutter like last season, so they're going to spend. And I think we need to take a step back and realize that with financial fair play and with it being mid-season and with, in some cases, it being Africa Cup of Nations, there's players that are either not available, don't want to move because they're returning from that tournament. The Asian Cup is another good example. It's not going to be an easy window to pull off business. The Werner links with Manchester United were there in the sense that they made a very superficial inquiry, but I'm not aware that anything has come of it. You've got a player like Sergio Guirassy, who could be a good option. Manchester United are one of the clubs that have been scouting him. And there's a relatively low release clause there, which could facilitate a move. But that kind of player wants to know they're going to get game time. And January is a hard sell. It's the same with Chelsea. I'm sure we'll come on to it. Because if you're saying to a forward, we want you now because we have need, then that forward is going to counter and say, well, what about in the summer when someone else becomes available? And the last thing a player in form and playing regularly wants to do is move now and then find that they get half a season's worth of football. And then in the summer, things get reassessed and they're caught in a big club, in a big squad, and they're further down the pecking order. So it's obvious with Manchester United that they want a striker because Rasmus Højlund was not the only profile they were looking for. The irony, of course, is that they paid a much higher fee than they were anticipating. So could they have invested a little bit more and still tried for Kane? But they never really made that serious push because they didn't think there was a realistic possibility. And I think we have to be careful about bashing Manchester United on Kane, because how Levy and Spurs acted with Manchester United may have been very different to how Levy and Spurs ended up acting with Bayern Munich, because seemingly, talking to sources, Daniel Levy didn't want a situation where he was going to let Kane go to a Premier League rival. And imagine the outcry at Spurs now when, if they had sold Kane to Manchester United, they are struggling with injuries and they haven't replaced Kane. Manchester United added 25 Kane goals if we're using his Bayern numbers and were top of the table. There would be huge outcry. There'd be huge pressure on Levy. So you can understand why maybe it was wrong rule for Manchester United in terms of negotiation and price, and another one for Bayern Munich. But I think that Manchester United may look at short-term loans. We've obviously seen them do that before. We've seen them surprise us with the odd name like Igalo in the past, or Weghorst a little bit more recently. So I do think that that is a possibility, but I'm not aware of anything advanced on the Werner front, even though he was discussed. I know that some people are throwing Thomas Muller into the mix as well, which would be a massive surprise. You're not getting an out-and-out goal scorer there, but you're getting a player with huge personality and a lot of experience. But I don't think that's the right profile for Manchester United, even in the short term. And he signed a new deal anyway, so I can't believe that anything's going to happen there either. But I think by the end of the window, Manchester United will have brought in one or two, but anything that they spend, even a loan with a loan fee, is still going to have to be financed by outgoings.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Viewers, any questions you've got about Man United, get them in to us now. You mentioned Chelsea already, and their window looks interesting because there's links to players coming in, of course. But two exits I wanted to start with when it surrounds Chelsea. One is Maatsen, a player that I think in the summer most Chelsea fans thought was going to feature heavily with the way he was being played in pre-season. And then right at the end of the window, there was that shock moment where he looked like he was leaving. The other name is someone who's been captain a lot of this year, started the majority of games in Gallagher, both seemingly looking like they could be potentially leaving in January. What is the latest on Maatsen and Gallagher's potential exits, mate?
Well, Maatsen is a player that Chelsea would like to sell. It's as simple as that. And they wanted to do that last summer as well. And Burnley, where he was previously on loan, came calling right on deadline day. And they offered 31.5 million as an eventual package. And Chelsea said yes, and Maatsen said no, because he'd come off the back of a pre-season where he'd actually impressed Mauricio Pochettino, and he was allowed to play in a more advanced position. And he is versatile, that he can play as a left back, as a fullback, as an inverted fullback, or go into midfield and even move into the wing as well. And that's the advantage of the type of player that he is. So there's plenty of teams looking for versatility that see Maatsen as a viable option, and Dortmund are one of them, but they want a loan. And again, Chelsea are looking for a fee. And it's a very similar point to be made about Manchester United. It doesn't help Chelsea just to loan out Maatsen. And if they only loan out Maatsen and then they do pick up another injury, the fan base are going to turn around and say, we're lacking in cover, we're lacking in depth. So the justification for Chelsea in selling is trying to bring in money, which means that they will sell Maatsen, but they want an equivalent package to the one they accepted last summer, which is just over 30 million. I understand that the exact fee that Burnley had agreed was a total package of 31.5 million. And Maatsen's probably right now, if we're not talking about Gallagher, the other big sellable asset for Chelsea to fund some January business, or put some money towards summer business for the likes of an Osimhen, or potentially, but less likely, I'm led to believe, Ivan Toney. And the reason for that is because, yes, they could sell somebody like Trevor Chalobah, but he's injured at the moment. They could try and get a fee for Marc Cucurella, but they might need him. And the advantage of Cucurella is he can play on the left side or the right side, and even at a push move into centre-back as well. So he might be a player that Chelsea need. Maatsen hasn't quite got enough minutes, quite broken into the side enough. So he is a sellable asset, and Dortmund is still one to watch there. With Conor Gallagher, I think a sale would cause real outrage amongst the Chelsea fan base. And that's because Gallagher's been one of Chelsea's best players, probably only second to Cole Palmer at the moment. But Chelsea's position is very clear, that regardless of the player desire to sell, and regardless of the fact that he could still be offered a new contract, he hasn't been at the moment. And the current deal expires in 2025. So Chelsea's policy is crystal clear. If players are heading into the last year or so of their contract and nothing has been agreed, they are for sale, because Chelsea want to be able to cash in on them. And we saw the same with Mason Mount. So if an offer is made for Conor Gallagher, and it is still an if, then the board at Chelsea will consider it. Mauricio Pochettino has captained Gallagher and would ideally like to keep him, certainly until the end of the season at least. And Gallagher would like to fight for his place. And I'm sure if Gallagher was offered a new deal that was financially beneficial to him, he would sign in a heartbeat because he would also like to keep playing at Chelsea. But Chelsea's recruitment team may be thinking about other incomings in the next 2 windows. They may be thinking about the longer term. And for the right offer, Gallagher's for sale. Now, what that right offer is ranges from, at the lower end, 45 million guaranteed, to at the higher end, 55 million guaranteed. But there will be bonuses on top. So the total package for Gallagher could end up being close to 60 million that Chelsea would like to accept. The Tottenham links are genuine in the sense that they admired him last window. They inquired last window. They wanted to pay a total package of about 35 million. And Chelsea said, you're 10, 15 million away from our asking price, and nothing came of it. So let's wait and see whether Spurs revisit it. We did see some reports in Italy saying talks had started, but as I revealed a few days ago, that's not my understanding. I'm not aware of formal talks between Spurs and Chelsea for Conor Gallagher. So there is still a good chance that Gallagher stays at Chelsea, but it's a long window. And I'd equally be surprised if somebody doesn't at least try their luck and make a more significant inquiry, which hasn't happened at this point. So that, a bit like Lewis Hall, where there was also contention when he signed a new deal and then moved to Newcastle, and that will eventually become an obligation. I'm sure the terms will be met to make that deal permanent. That's an example maybe of Chelsea having to think, even though it's cold-hearted and dispassionate, about the long term and about their project over the now. Whereas Pochettino is only on a guaranteed 2-year deal. Yes, there's a 1-year club extension, but Pochettino knows that in his control, he's got 2 years. Chelsea may make it 3, but he's got 2 years. So, of course, Pochettino's thinking about the now. Of course, Pochettino wants a player like Gallagher. And, of course, Pochettino is thinking about, how on earth can I make sure that I stay at this football club and get this football club into Europe? But Chelsea's longer-term board are thinking more about the finances, about the vision, 2 windows ahead, multi-club model. And if they feel they need to sell Gallagher, they may exert some pressure. And the thing I want to clarify is that in this kind of model, there's bound to be different perspectives and voices, and the freedom to challenge is vital. Otherwise, you've just got a load of yes people. But Pochettino, to my knowledge, and contrary to some reports, has not got this enhanced power. He's always been an important voice. His input is valuable, but he doesn't have any enhanced power into January, which means that if Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, who are leading the show, if Behrad Agbali, who's the most powerful person at the club, if the likes of Joe Shields, who's very important, if they all say, we want to sell, and Pochettino says, I want to keep, and Gallagher says, I'd prefer to stay, then Gallagher and Pochettino may to some extent be outvoted. And then obviously Gallagher will have the ability to say, sorry, I'm not talking to that club. Or if you really want me out, I am prepared to entertain some kind of negotiation. So the dynamic at Chelsea is not going to change, which means that regardless of what Pochettino wants, if the rest of the recruitment team decide the offer is right, then they will exert some kind of, in inverted commas, pressure, telling Gallagher that he should probably listen to the offer that's on the table.
Which I understand it from Chelsea's point of view. I suppose for me, just on the outside looking in, although they do have Lavia, they have Caicedo, they have Enzo, who I think on paper, in terms of technical ability, are better than Gallagher. Gallagher has been their best performing midfielder this year, whether their fans like hearing that or not. However, will he maintain those levels? I don't quite know. It does feel to me very much like it's a pure profit on FFP sale. They've obviously spent a lot of money, long-term contracts, and I need to recoup some of that. Whether or not it turns out to be the right move or not remains to be seen. But even in the comments now, there's people saying, get rid of him now, move him on, don't want Gallagher here. And there are other Chelsea fans that are absolutely fuming about the idea of Conor Gallagher leaving. So it's a decision that whatever happens has to go right from a footballing point of view for Chelsea, because there's obviously a lot of pressure on the new owners and the manager as it stands. In terms of players coming in, there's a few names to throw out there and talk about. The first one I wanted to mention was a centre-back. I don't quite know why Chelsea had linked to another centre-back, but of course, Todibo has been linked to Tottenham. He's obviously been linked to Man United because of the Nice-Ineos connections. But now Chelsea in the last few days have been linked with a potential move for the very talented French centre-back. What's your understanding about Chelsea going in for him and the likelihood of a move away from Nice?
Yeah, just a quick point about Chelsea and Gallagher to finish up, and then we can move on to that. You have to think about the Chelsea selection when everybody's fit. and if we include this window in 2 windows' time. So Chelsea are playing this 4-2-3-1. And yes, Gallagher can play in a more advanced position, but there's all manner of competition there. If he's one of the 2 holding midfielders, if everybody's fit, he's competing against Caicedo and he's competing against Lavia primarily. I'm not sure if other players are fully in form that he gets into those 2. But at the moment he does, because Lavia's recovering from injury. Enzo Fernandez has been ill. Moises Caicedo is bedding in. And as importantly, you have Reece James injured and Ben Chilwell also sidelined. So Gallagher is captain. So Pochettino's thinking about having a leader on the field, whereas when he has his captain fit, then he's only thinking about Gallagher as a central midfielder. And again, yes, he can be more advanced, more box to box. He can be a bit versatile. But if Nkunku's fit, he's going to play behind the striker. And then Gallagher's not really a wide midfielder that's going to be taking a spot off a Sterling or a Madueke or a Mudryk. And I don't see Pochettino moving to 3 in central midfield. So Gallagher could go down the pecking order. Then coming on to the Chelsea centre-back front, as you say, there's been these links from France with Nice's Jean-Claire Todibo. I'm not sure there's anything in it, if I'm absolutely honest with you. Talking to sources, I was told that Chelsea had scouted the player much like they've done hundreds. If you ever actually saw a list of players tracked or scouted, you would be staggered that it's hundreds. So scouting can be done because you want a yardstick, because you want a counter option, you want a backup option, you want a future option, because you want to put a price on that scouting mission so you can use it to go for another player in the market. So scouting doesn't always mean a great deal. And it is true that Chelsea looked at the player a few weeks back, I think late last year, but there's no active talks between Chelsea and the player or between Chelsea and Nice at the moment. And I reiterate what I said on the Spurs front. For Spurs, Todibo was a clear target. They started talks. They were immediately pessimistic, and that's why they've moved on. And the reason for that is not because of some plot whereby Ratcliffe's waiting to come in at Manchester United and then will sell the player to Manchester United. It's because Nice simply do not want to sell. And they don't want to sell because they realise that if they need to do so in the summer, they can still get a decent price. And in addition to that, they're 5 points off PSG, challenging for Champions League football and second place in Ligue 1 mid-season. So it's almost like a Leverkusen situation where we hear all these links with Leverkusen players, but why are Leverkusen going to let any of their star names, if they can possibly help it, go midway through the season when they're looking for a Bundesliga title and a Champions League place? So I don't think the player's for sale. And I'm told that the only thing that may change that, because financially speaking, Nice may have to sell for some kind of astronomical offer, is something in the region of 60 million euros. And given the clubs that have looked and valued the player, thinking more around the 35 or 40 million euros, there's a big gap between those two. So I certainly don't see Chelsea moving for the player. It's absolutely true that Chelsea will look for centre-back in 2024, especially obviously if they can sell Trevor Chalobah. But the last thing I want to mention on Chelsea is look at Chelsea's business a bit like Manchester United, as one in, one out. And it won't quite be as scientific as that. And it won't quite be a case that they have to wait and sell and then buy. But Chelsea don't want to end this window with more players than they started with. And if they possibly can, they would even like to reduce the senior squad by 1 or 2. And they can do that, obviously, by buying one, selling one, and then loaning one. And I think if you look at Chelsea like that, like we've just seen Alex Matos go to Huddersfield on loan, that's a good example. I think Chelsea's strategy for this window is to buy, sell, loan, and then that will pretty much be their January.
Excuse me. Makes a hell of a lot of sense. So, to me and Todibo, listen, I'll be honest with you. I understand that the Man United Nice links, Ineos links doesn't guarantee it. But if we let him go anywhere else, I'll be fuming. I think he's great. To have that kind of connection and not signing would be crazy. But also with Chelsea, a lot of their fans are asking about it. What is the latest when it comes to Victor Osimhen Is that a deal that you can see Chelsea getting done in January as of, right now, that the 3rd of that month?
Well, I don't think anything will happen for Victor Osimhen in January. The only hope that clubs might have, including Chelsea, is some kind of pre-agreement in January for the summer. There's a release clause in the new contract, which is over £100 million. Some say it's as high as £115 million. My sources at Napoli have downplayed that slightly, which might suggest that it's a slightly more complicated clause. But Osimhen won't leave Napoli mid-season, and that's because they're still in the Champions League. And quite clearly, he's signed with an agreement, both through the release clause, but also no doubt with his relationship with the club, that says stay for the season and then you are free to talk to clubs and we won't stand in your way in the summer, effectively using that release clause as a mechanism to be triggered or a yardstick for valuation with a different structure. So there is a possibility that Chelsea turn around and say, the right name is not available in January. We're going to wait for Osimhen, but we're going to try and get ahead of the market and pre-agree a deal. You certainly can't rule that out, because we saw Chelsea do that with Christopher Nkunku, where they pre-agreed a deal and then he joined during the summer. But nothing will happen in terms of Osimhen actually moving in the month of January. And then if you're Osimhen, unless you are set on one club, and I don't think he is at this point, you probably wait, because he knows that he's not going to be short of suitors. Not every suitor is going to be able to pay that 100+ million price tag, but there's a possibility that Manchester United enter the race if they can sort their finances out by summer and if they can qualify for Champions League. And Osimhen may say it's more in his interest to wait and see who's got what come the end of the season, because he may want to play Champions League football next season. Or Chelsea may turn around and say, look, believe in the project. We might miss out on Champions League football. They might have some kind of European football. Take the hit in a year, guide us back to Champions League football, get a great wage, get a great package. And Osimhen might be convinced by that. We had a lot of talk of ex-Chelsea players saying Osimhen wants Chelsea. We see the photo of Osimhen with the Chelsea shirt. But the thing people don't realise is that before he moved to Napoli, Manchester United were quite close to signing Victor Osimhen when he was still at Lille. And he actually spoke to Igalo, much like Mikel John Obi, another close friend of his. And Igalo said, I don't think this is right for you. And Osimhen felt that he wouldn't get the game time at Old Trafford, but he was very sold on the club at that point. And when asked about is his childhood allegiance Chelsea or Manchester United, Osimhen's answer is, I had a shirt of both. So I think that Osimhen's primary concern is to take his time and to move still, I think, very likely in the summer of 2024 and also very likely to the Premier League. But I don't think that at this stage it's entirely locked in that it will be Chelsea or any other club. But I do think that if there is one club that are ambitious enough and audacious enough to at least try their luck in January with a view to the summer, that would most likely be Chelsea.
A lot of things that get thrown at Chelsea fans are they're not making the Champions League this year, or it's very unlikely that they will. That would be 2-3 years without qualifying. Only like a high mid-table or a damn in the middle of the mid-table range. How would that impact, in your opinion, their ability to sign a star the size of Victor Osimhen? Rivals will tell Chelsea fans, there's no way you're signing names like him, not being in the Champions League, being nowhere near a title race. Does that ring true to you in terms of what you hear in the footballing world behind the scenes?
No, not at all. I mean, Chelsea is a massive club, much like Manchester United is. And these kind of clubs can dine off their history, but also off their project and their ambition. And players are not necessarily having the same thought process as fans when they think about the appeal of a club. The appeal of a club can be also based upon the city. So London is a big pull. It can be based on the wages, naturally, and it can be based on the manager and the game time. So when people say Chelsea could never get Osimhen, well, why not? Because if Osimhen believes that he's going to start every week, he's going to score every week, he can emulate one of his idols, Didier Drogba, he can fire Chelsea back into the Champions League, or he can play in the Champions League if Chelsea do somehow qualify, he can win trophies, he can get well compensated, it's the right move for his family, it's the right city. why on earth would he not join Chelsea? But of course, a fan will say, Osimhen's not going to Chelsea if they're 10th in the table. And that might be a factor if he's got a counter offer and he wants immediate Champions League football. But there'll be other criteria that Osimhen judges the move by. I don't know many players that have turned down Chelsea or Manchester United. I know clubs that have turned down players. But when Manchester United come calling for a young talent like Rasmus Højlund, he jumps. When they wanted Amrabat, he wanted the move. When they wanted Casemiro, he wanted the move. Maybe you could say Van der Beek was a player that needed a bit more convincing based on the manager rather than the club. And maybe you can say that De Jong didn't want to join Manchester United, but he was at a massive club like Barcelona. But unless the player is at an equivalent club in stature and history, when Chelsea or Manchester United come calling for these, they're always going to be in the mix. So I think it's nonsense that Osimhen would turn down Chelsea just because they're 12th in the table, 10th in the table, wherever. Osimhen's only going to turn down Chelsea if he gets a better financial offer, if he gets a better offer of European football, still within the Premier League, and he thinks, I've got two great options, now I can decide. But look at Moises Caicedo. He had a tremendous offer from Liverpool, but he still wanted Chelsea. So there's obvious pull there. And if they can get Caicedo, even with Liverpool interest, why can't they get Victor Osimhen? And that's not me saying Chelsea's biggest club in the world, or that's not me nailing my colours to Chelsea over any other club. I make the same point about Arsenal. I make the same point about Manchester United. I make the same point about Spurs. If the player wants London, if the player wants Premier League, then for the right package, Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, they're all in the same boat. They're never going to be turned down just because of where they currently are league position-wise. They're only going to be turned around to a different route if there's another club that enters the mix whereby the wages or the project are better. And if there's only one club, then of course the player's going to say, it's London, it's a big club, it's great wages, it's an exciting project, I'm going to get game time, it's Premier League football. What's to turn down?
Look, I totally agree. I understand that the fandom element and the whole... I was a Man United fan. I've been told for 10 years now, every time we're linked to a big player but not getting him. We don't get all of them. Frankie de Jong's a great example. But I remember the first links to Pogba, Zlatan, Casemiro. I remember the Varane summer. There was no chance in hell we were getting him. And as much as Chelsea are not in a good position right now, they are still Chelsea Football Club. And AC Milan are not what they were. But if they had the money, they could pretty much sign anyone in the world they want. They're still AC Milan, and there is still that pull. And I think fans... So I don't personally believe that Chelsea have got zero chance of getting Victor Osimhen just because they're not in the Champions League. Of course, money plays a part in this as well. Being in the Premier League also plays a part. It's the biggest... May not be everybody's favourite, but one thing that can't be disputed, it has more eyes on it than anywhere else in the world. So there's so many factors as to why players would want to come here. In terms of any other incomings for January for Chelsea, are there any players out there that you think Chelsea fans should be keeping their eyes on?
Well, I think that as far as Chelsea are concerned, it will be a quieter window. It's as simple as that. So I don't think that there's anything concrete with Chelsea at the moment because they were focusing on outgoings. I know we've heard some talk of Victor Gyökeres, who's doing incredibly well, but there's a 100 million release clause there. My understanding is that Chelsea have decided against that. I think in the build up to the window, when he was one name on the list, people were maybe thinking that it would be a similar situation to Enzo Fernandez, where Chelsea go, they fight, they try and get a structure in or around the release clause, they put pressure, and then the player decides that he wants the move. But actually, in this particular instance, the player has done the opposite to Enzo Fernandez and given his guarantees to Ruben Amorim that he wants to stay until the end of the season. So I think that this is a example of a transfer that Chelsea might have considered if the financial terms were more preferable, but I don't see them being able to do anything. And, you know, the other thing is that the move only happened to Sporting from Coventry at the beginning of this season. So you can understand why Sporting are a little bit more bullish about hanging on to the player. So I think with Chelsea, if we are to get any surprises, it's probably going to be young players for the future. And as far as senior business is concerned, many of the names that we've discussed will be their focus. And they'll be looking at those two key positions of a elite striker in either January or the summer, and then a centre-back if they can get their hands on. Maybe because of the kind of injury crisis, they'll look for like a versatile fullback, maybe a centre-back that can play fullback or a predominant fullback that can play both sides or can also play centre-back. And then if, and it is a massive if, Gallagher was to go, then a midfielder as well. But those are the positional targets for 2 windows, not 1 window. And that's, again, the thing to get your head around, that Chelsea are going to be more patient because they're halfway through a 4-window plan. And they've done a lot of big overhaul and spend. So if it can't be done in January, they will wait until the summer to fill some of those positions that I've just mentioned.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. As you say, that it was so busy for the last 3 windows for them. There's always going to come a point where it's slowed down. Chelsea fans, let us know what you think and feel. There is a question here from a Chelsea fan who says, any news on Kimmhc?
Yeah, I'm not aware of Kimmhc and Chelsea, even though I've seen some of the links out there. I think that from the perspective of Chelsea, the profile maybe of the player is not what they're looking for at the moment. He's 28. I know that he's relatively versatile, but I was kind of always told that the clubs that were looking for Kimmhc were more potentially Liverpool, though nothing advanced, and even Manchester United as well. And we wait and see whether Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos influence that in any way. But I haven't heard of anything that is advancing with Kimmhc and Chelsea.
Yeah, I've seen his name links. This is one of those things where I suppose there's examples where it doesn't go this way. But whenever Bayern Munich are willing to let a player of his age or slightly older leave, it's always a bad sign for me. Generally speaking, it never really ends too well. So I think he'll be staying if he's still of that level. Now, I want to move on to Arsenal, who a lot of their fans were flying high a few weeks ago. No win in 3 games, struggling to put the ball in the back of the net. The name on the tips of all of their tongues is Ivan Toney, this potential £100 million deal. Chelsea are also linked to the player. What is the likelihood of Ivan Toney to Arsenal or any other goal scorer joining in this window, in your opinion, Ben, based on what you've heard?
Well, I think Toney's admired by Arsenal, but it's nothing more than that at this stage. So admiration doesn't mean offer or transfer. And I think it's pretty unlikely that Toney will leave unless he does a sort of Caicedo and throws his toys out the pram, which would be a nuts move given that Brentford have looked after him during the ban. He's training well, according to sources, and he'll now be eligible in mid-January. So the priority for Toney is game time. And moving mid-season when he might be a bit rusty as far as match sharpness is concerned is going to be a big, big challenge. And to facilitate the move, Brentford's asking price has to be hit as well. And that's out of Arsenal's budget. So I think Toney's going to be one to watch more for the summer. And we can't rule out 2 other possibilities. One is that he signs a new deal and there's a release clause. But the complication there is that Toney would want higher wages than Brentford would probably be prepared to pay. Second possibility is that he ends up leaving on a free transfer in 2025 and then Brentford ultimately get another season out of Toney and he puts this whole betting ban behind him and gets back to scoring ways. I suppose Arsenal fans will be saying, and it is a very neat narrative, but with Raya, Brentford eventually gave us a structure that suited financial fair play. Why can't they do the same with Toney? Why can't they give us the player in a way that ends up giving them the money, but gives Arsenal a structure that's in keeping with financial fair play? And I think that's a very neat narrative, but it implies that Brentford are going to kind of step aside or bend over and give Arsenal everything they want. And Brentford have got all the cards here. The other thing with Toney that people forget is that Wissa's gone to AFCON and Mbeumo's injured. So Brentford need Toney more than ever because they're sliding in the wrong direction. So when you add up all of those points, I just don't see Toney going in January. And if he was to go, you're looking at a minimum of £80 million. And some say that it will even be closer to 100 million as a so-called January asking price. So that takes Arsenal out of the equation. So Toney to Arsenal's one to watch in the sense that Toney would welcome an offer from Arsenal, and were they to make a January offer, then who knows, Toney might exert a little bit of pressure. But I just don't think Arsenal will move in January for Toney. So I think this is something that we'll be revisiting in the summer. And then I think that Thomas Partey's out, obviously, at the moment. And even though Jorginho's there, let's wait and see whether Arsenal look to strengthen in a different area. Zubimendi, I'm not sure about, because he had reservations about moving to Arsenal for his development. And I'm not sure whether mid-season will be possible, especially because Sociedad are doing really well in Europe as well. But there's no doubt that he was a target. And Douglas Luiz is hugely admired. But again, Sociedad are doing well. They want to hang on to their players. We spoke before about Leverkusen doing well. They want to hang on to their players. Nice are doing well. They want to hang on to their players. And guess what? Aston Villa are doing well. They want to hang on to their players. So this is that point I made before, which is always forgotten in January because the window opens and everyone thinks sign, sign, sign. But I reiterate what I said before. The January window is difficult because it is fast and it is a seller's market. And therefore, if Brentford name a price for Toney, there's no time for haggling, negotiation, games. If Brentford say, we want 80 to 100 million, and Arsenal say, that's just not something that we're prepared to pay or can pay under financial fair play, then it's game over. You move on. You've not got time to mess about. You've not got time to play games. You've not got too much time to get into a negotiation, unless you believe that when you get into that quick negotiation, the price is going to drop significantly. And I don't think that Arsenal would enter the race for Toney in January unless they thought that it was 50 to 60 million. And I think 80 million is the bare minimum. So I don't think that Toney will move in January to anybody, but certainly not Arsenal, because it's just not financially feasible for them. But then, if he's obviously still at Brentford come the end of the season, let's see what Arsenal do. The final thing I want to say is that if Arsenal were to bring in a striker, then it would be an indication that they might start listening to offers for Eddie Nketiah. If they keep Nketiah, it probably tells you that they're not looking to spend big on a forward in this window. They'll stick with what they've got. They'll revisit it in the summer. So that might be a clue. If Nketiah is sold to, for example, Crystal Palace, who are one of the clubs that are genuinely looking at him, alongside PSG's Hugo Ekitike for Crystal Palace, then Arsenal might get some money. Then Arsenal will have a spot available for a striker. And if they sell Nketiah, it might tell you that there is a target there that they think they can pull off in January to effectively replace Nketiah. But if Nketiah is not sold, then Arsenal might just wait until the right target becomes available. And that might mean being patient until summer 2024.
Yeah, Arsenal fans don't appear overly patient at the moment, Ben. They obviously want to try and win this Premier League title. The view is from a lot of gooners that I've spoken to, a lot that we get in the comments, is if we don't sign a prolific striker in January, this season is over in that regard. But I suppose if you can't get that prolific striker at the right price in January, you have to think more long-term for the club. Instead of paying 30, 40 million pounds over the odd, which I know a lot of football fans have this notion of it ain't my money, I don't care. But that will essentially stop you from signing another additional player at some stage down the line, which you are going to need as well. So I suppose there is that element of, I know everybody wants to win in the here and now. That need for instant gratification is huge. But at the same time, you can't, I'm not an advocate of overspending on players, because at some point when you burn the candle at both ends, we know what happens to football clubs and also general people in life. So they've got to get that right. But I think Arsenal fans will be disappointed if they get to the end of January and there are no good quality additions into their squad. I do think there's going to be a lot of frustration from their fans, to be fair.
Yeah, I think so. But I also don't understand why fans have this collective clamour, as you say, to buy. And if they know a bit less about the player, they get excited about any signing and they correlate the success of that signing with a few YouTube clips and the price tag. But if it was a car and you were buying it, and I said to you, you want to buy a car in 2024, and there's a 5-year-old car available on the market for 10 grand. It's a little bit bashed up, but it's relatively reliable. It might not be your first choice, but it's available. And it means that you can get a new car now, even though maybe what you've got is fine.
Yeah.
Or if you wait until summer, then for 15 grand, only 5 grand more, I'll give you a brand new Ferrari. In that kind of situation, everyone would say, well, I would be nuts to buy the 5-year-old second-hand car. And of course, it's never that clear cut in football transfers, but you could make an argument of, do you buy Ivan Toney now, or do you get Osimhen in the summer? And I'm by no means calling Osimhen a 5-year-old bashed up second-hand car. But my point is that if you're comparing the two like for like, maybe there's a debate there to be had. But I think many would say wait for Osimhen. And if obviously it was a little bit more extreme, for example, if we go back to Manchester United and I said to you, do you want a new sort of model on the market that could be really exciting, but is not that predictable as to how it will develop in terms of popularity? That's Rasmus Højlund. And if you'd have genuinely said this possibility wasn't around, so it's purely hypothetical to make a point. But if I basically said to you, do you want to buy Højlund now, as Manchester United did, or do you want to wait 6 months and get Kane? And again, that wasn't a possibility. So this is purely hypothetical. Every single Manchester United supporter, when given a choice between Højlund and Kane, would have said, of course we need to wait for Kane if we can only get one of them. But somehow when the window opens, fans are more inclined to say, but we're wobbling. But our league position might suggest that we're moving in the wrong direction. So we need a stopgap. We need an immediate fix now. And recruitment teams can't get sucked into that public clamour. Otherwise, they might spend their budget on a mistake and then not be able to get the actual long-term solution later down the line.
And I'm not defending Arsenal per se here, because I actually think the one thing I do look at is the owners. And if you are close to FFP, they haven't invested anything. They can invest £100 million today if they wanted towards player transfers, because they're allowed to put £100 million in every 3-year cycle. So the owners of Arsenal could fix this problem if it's an FFP issue instantly. That I get challenging. But in terms of panicking and let's just pay it, look what Man United did with Antony as an example. Now, I know Ivan Toney will be more of a success than Antony, but that's a £25 million player that we messed up on so bad that we dropped £90 million on. That means we're from an FFP perspective, if we'd have got him for 25 million and he flopped, there'd still be 65, 70 million to invest. You could maybe go out and get Olise now. You could go, right, we'll pay above the odds. You could go out and buy, a lot of players talk about Bakayoko. I don't know how good this guy's going to be. I've only seen him play twice. But you could go into the market now with that extra money and get it done. You do need to be mindful of not overpaying. I don't believe you should overpay in the pursuit of a trophy now. At the same time, you should, in my opinion, demand that your owners invest money, do whatever they can to raise the funds that are needed. So I do think there's a happy medium in these conversations. But as ever on social media, it's always very one-track minded in terms of just get it done now, as opposed to thinking bigger picture. But that's football. Mbappe 2024. Where's he going? That's from a Liverpool fan. Sarim's a Liverpool fan, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, Kylian Mbappe, as I reported, won't rush into any decisions, and summer 2024 could see him leave on a free. But the reason PSG are calm is because they've got an actual binding, keyword, legal commitment that means even if he goes on a free now, the club still make money. And as a consequence, there's not this bad blood now and feeling that Mbappe is somehow betraying PSG by leaving on a free and then them not getting a fee. So one possibility is summer 2024 Real Madrid. And if Mbappe goes on a free, then PSG will still make money and Real Madrid will get their man. But don't rule out an extension at PSG. And that extension could be to stay until at least 2025, or it could be to leave in the summer and put a release clause. If there's a release clause, Real Madrid still could pay it, but it will likely mean that Mbappe has offered a lower sign-on fee. And this is another thing I think a lot of fans sometimes need clarity on. A free transfer is never a free transfer, because if a player like Mbappe knows he's a free transfer, then he's going to ask for a bigger sign-on fee. There's going to be agents' fees. There's going to be wages. So Mbappe knows what he's worth. And he's basically saying to Real Madrid, if I'm a free, I want 130 million euros, which is probably the ballpark for a transfer fee. If Mbappe signs a new deal, then Real Madrid might have to pay the 130 million euros to PSG, but then Mbappe may get a lower sign-on fee. So either way, it costs money.
Which is why I've said it for years. Generally speaking, the way net spend is done in the newspapers doesn't exist really, because at the end of the day, it's more complicated than that, and it's boiled down. That's why some people don't understand the FFP situation, because well, the net spend is good. Well, is it? What have you paid in agent fees? How much have the wages gone up by? You look at Liverpool's model, and when they do well and win, the bonuses are so huge that for the following 18 months, their wage bill goes up to one of the highest in the world. That all factors into the costs of running a football club. And this idea of, well, we bought 100 million pounds worth and we sold 80 million pounds worth, that means we only spent 20 million, isn't true. Because some clubs spend lower transfer fees, but they pay exorbitant agent fees, as an example, because that's how they're able to get these deals so low. So there's so much that goes into it, to be fair. But look, I know you've got a hard stop at 5 Ben. It's great to talk, and I'm sure we'll have a number of these shows over the course of January, keeping the viewers up to date with what is going on in the January transfer window. As always, it's a pleasure to speak to you and your jumpers. I always enjoy it, mate, every single time. There's no doubt about it. Viewers, make sure like buttons have been hit. Make sure you're subscribing. We're back at 3:30 with Sava for Straight Facts today. So look forward to seeing you all then. Take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all soon.